Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Situating Science podcast. I'm Izzy Morin, cluster student at the Situating Science Strategic Knowledge Cluster. This is the next installment in a series of podcasts complementing the upcoming Lives of Evidence National Lecture Series. The lecture series will be looking at the lives and death of evidence. Because the death of evidence is on everyone's lips, key questions are being raised in various realms of research. Some of the questions being raised by speakers will explore how evidence is produced, how trust in evidence and research can be maintained or destroyed, the relationship between research, funding, and policy, and whether or not transparency has a place in research. The lecture series will highlight the urgency of these matters and what we can do to prolong and enhance the lives of evidence. Joining us today is Dr. Carl Elliott, professor in the Center for Bioethics and the Department of Pediatrics, an affiliate faculty member in the Department of Philosophy and the School of Journalism and Mass Communications at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Elliott's talk, An Atypical Suicide of Psychiatric Research Abuse at the University of Minnesota, will cast a critical eye towards ethics and the risks that research subjects are faced with in medical research. So, Dr. Elliott, a recent entry on your blog, Fear and Loathing in Bioethics, was an interview with Robert Helms of the Guinea Pig Zero Project, a journal for human research subjects. Discussed is the role of self-publishing in human medical research. Though the zine that Helms started was originally meant to portray the culture around professional guinea pigging, there was also some issue with confidentiality. Could you speak to the role of self-publishing in awareness on medical research with human test subjects and the constraints that may skew or obstruct the subject's ability to speak candidly about their experience?
Well, I guess by self-publishing, you're talking about Bob's zine, Guinea Pig Zero. I loved Guinea Pig Zero when it came out back in the 1990s. What Bob was trying to do, I think, was to give a research subject's eye of what was actually going on in clinical trials at the time. And so the kinds of things that he would write about were the kinds of things that the IRBs that I was on, or actually REBs since I was at McGill at the time, were looking at. I mean, they were just completely different. So he would write about things like, can the nurses hit a vein? What kind of food do they give you? Do they pay you on time? Do they give you hot showers or just cold showers? Will they make you sleep in a chair if they run out of beds? Will they give you a rectal exam whether or not you need it? All the kinds of things that I'd never even really thought of when I was looking at protocols from the outside. And what it made me understand was that there were a lot of things that were relevant to research subjects in a big way that people on the outside are not even at all thinking about. The terrific thing about the zine and what really got him in trouble were the report cards that he would publish on research sites. He and his guinea pig operatives would go out, do trials, and then write a report card on what the experience was like. And if it was a good site and they did everything on the up and up and they paid you on time and were honest with you, they would give them an A. But if they weren't, he would give them an F. And the people who got Fs didn't like it, so they sued him. But he eventually got that lawsuit dropped, so he won out in the end.
It wasn't really a confidentiality issue after all?
I don't think it was a confidentiality issue, no. I mean, Bob, I don't think he ever felt constrained about what he was writing. I mean, he took risks because anytime you write things about unpleasant about people with the power to strike back at you, you run the danger of that actually happening. But I think Bob would say it was worth it.
So what do you think are some of the dangers that research subjects typically encounter in medical research, and how is it that they're not being protected against the risks in some cases?
Well, obviously there are the risks of the study drug, and there's the risk that you will be getting a drug that doesn't help your condition. There's the risk of, if you were sick, of being given a placebo and having your condition not being treated. I think what struck me about Guinea Pig Zero and the things Bob was writing about were that the risks were things that people on the outside had never even really thought about. There are risks to your health, for example, by taking part in a trial site in which the researchers, the investigators, are incompetent to take care of your health. And those are typically not the kinds of things that will ever come out on a consent form.
Are there any measures that could be taken against these kinds of oversights?
They are, but I think it would require a complete revamping of our oversight system. I mean, there's a huge problem right now in that there's a tremendous gap between what actually goes on in trial sites and what IRBs or REBs look at on paper. I mean, as long as you have a purely paper review and you don't have anybody actually stepping into the trial site itself and talking to subjects and monitoring consent and seeing what the facilities are like, you run the risk of being completely ignorant of what's really going on. And in the session just before you came, we were talking about I don't understand why the episode of SFBC International in Miami in 2005 didn't have any more impact than it had. I mean, this was the case of the largest clinical trial site on the continent. This is a 675-bed facility. Was being run out of a condemned motel for, I think, close to 10 years, with the patient population being mainly undocumented immigrants, many of whom didn't even speak English, being paid to do phase 1 testing. Now, it turned out that the medical director didn't have a medical license. It turned out that the IRB was run by the wife of the company vice president. The motel was housing twice as many people as it had been approved to house. It had been judged a fire hazard by the county supervisors, and yet it had been permitted to continue. In fact, the company running it had been voted the third most admired small business in America just a couple of years before the whole thing was discovered. And when it was eventually discovered, it was discovered by investigative reporters for Bloomberg Markets magazines. It was not ever discovered by regulators or IRBs. Now, how is it possible to run a trial site, the largest trial site on the continent, out of a condemned motel for 10 years with nobody noticing? I mean, as scandalous as the fact that it happened is the fact that when it was discovered, there was essentially no reform made. We still have the exact same system that allowed that to happen continuing. SFBC changed its name, closed down its Miami facility, moved the headquarters from Miami to Princeton, New Jersey, and they're still in operation.
Outside of what is in the control of the research ethics boards, do you think that it's possible for test subjects to skew the results? I'm thinking specifically about Helms again, who would lie about the amount of time since the last experiment that he was a part of in order to be able to participate in more experiments. To what extent do you think this kind of subversion affects medical research, and to what extent is the risk to the research subject elevated?
I don't think anybody really knows, and I don't think anybody has an interest in finding out either. I mean, if you talk to people like Bob and the other guinea pig pros that I talk to, the impression you get is lying is routine, and you essentially have to do it in order to get into studies. And in general, the subjects that I talked to weren't terribly bothered by this. Because they didn't really feel as if anything terribly useful was coming out of the research anyway. We have to remember is that these are largely phase 1 trials, and so they're safety trials. And the point of a safety trial is to see if the drug is safe so that you can move on to treatment trials later on. I'm not sure it's real. I mean, phase 1 trials are hardly ever published. They are not even publicly registered for the most part on the clinicaltrials.gov website maintained by the U.S. federal government. So the results of the trials are very hard to get. The FDA sees them, but really that's in the company itself, but really that's about it. And so I'm not really, if it's a system that seems to be working well for everybody, working well for the pharma companies, working well for the guinea pigs themselves, I'm not really sure there is a huge amount of pressure for it to be changed.
Well, thank you for chatting with us today, Dr. Elliott, and thanks to the listeners for tuning in. For more information on the National Lecture Series and more podcasts, visit situsci.ca. That's situsci.ca.